She was my teacher once, polished, untouchable, and far out of reach. But that night, in the silence of an empty classroom, I realized she wasn't untouchable at all, she was simply waiting for someone to truly see her. The classroom always felt different after hours. When the bell rang and the students scattered, a hush settled in, the kind that made every sound sharper. The squeak of chair legs, the faint hum of the old fluorescent lights, even the soft scratch of a pen against paper carried weight. That evening, I stayed behind to help sort through a stack of assignments. It wasn't required of me, but she had asked, and the truth is, I didn't need much convincing. She was there, at her desk, sleeves rolled just above her elbows, dark hair tied back in a way that looked both effortless and deliberate. Mrs. Lane, though even in my head, the title felt too formal for the woman sitting only a few feet away. She had a presence that was both commanding and quietly fragile, a balance I'd never seen in anyone else. Her divorce had been whispered about in passing, the kind of staff-room gossip that trickled down even to me. But it wasn't the fact itself that stayed with me, it was the subtle shift I'd noticed in her. How the confidence was still there, but thinner around the edges, like fine porcelain that had been handled a little too roughly. I tried not to stare, though I caught myself stealing glances more often than I should. The way the soft light caught the curve of her cheekbone. The way her voice, calm and low, carried authority even when she was simply asking me to pass her another stack of papers. At one point, she slid a red pen across the desk toward me. Our fingers brushed. Just skin against skin, nothing more. But the moment lasted longer than it should have. Her hand lingered a fraction of a second, warm against mine, before she pulled back with a quiet clearing of her throat. The silence between us deepened. Not uncomfortable, just charged, like the air before rain. I focused on the papers, though my mind was elsewhere. On her. On the faint line of tiredness under her eyes that didn't take away from her beauty but added to it, as if every scar and hardship only made her more human, more magnetic. "You didn't have to stay," she said after a while, her tone softer now, stripped of the classroom formality. "I don't mind," I answered honestly. "Besides, it's quieter here." Her lips curved, just slightly, into a smile that felt like a reward. And for the first time, I sensed the gap between us wasn't as wide as I'd imagined. She wasn't just a teacher tonight. She was a woman, one who looked tired, yet graceful, and perhaps a little surprised that someone chose to stay. In that moment, I didn't know where this road would lead. But as the classroom lights flickered faintly above us, I knew one thing for certain: detention had never felt like this before. The rain began just as the last stack of papers thudded onto her desk. At first, it was soft, like fingertips tapping against the windowpanes. Then heavier, more insistent, until the sound wrapped itself around the room, cocooning us in a rhythm that felt strangely intimate. She exhaled, long and quiet, setting her pen down. "Funny," she murmured, more to herself than to me, "how quiet it always feels, when you know no one's waiting for you at home." I looked up, caught off guard by the honesty in her words. Mrs. Lane wasn't someone who let her guard down easily. She carried herself with the kind of composure that could silence a room, a presence polished by years of teaching, years of being the one in control. And yet, here she was, her eyes softened by something she hadn't intended to reveal. I didn't know what to say at first. Silence stretched, broken only by the rain and the soft hum of the overhead lights. Finally, I said the only thing that felt true: sometimes quiet isn't peace. Sometimes it's just empty. Her gaze lifted to mine, and for a moment it felt as if she were weighing me, testing whether my sincerity was real or just another polite response. Then she gave the faintest smile, one that curved but didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're too young to understand emptiness like that." "Maybe," I admitted, though I didn't look away. "But I can recognize it when I see it." Something in her expression shifted then. Not a smile, not sadness, but a flicker, a flash of being seen when she hadn't expected it. She leaned slightly closer across the desk, and the subtle fragrance of her perfume, soft, like jasmine and something warmer, reached me. She laughed, almost to break the tension. The sound was low and melodic, though tinged with something heavier, as though laughter had become a habit she used to shield herself. "You should be careful," she said lightly. "Words like that make a woman forget she's supposed to keep walls up." I let out a quiet chuckle, though my chest felt tight with something I couldn't name. Maybe walls don't always need to be there. Her hand moved then, almost absently, brushing mine as she passed me another paper. But this time, instead of pulling back quickly, she let it linger, just a heartbeat longer. Her touch wasn't deliberate enough to be bold, but not hesitant enough to be accidental either. The warmth of it settled deep in me, sparking something between us that neither of us acknowledged out loud. "Thank you for staying," she said softly, her fingers finally slipping away. "It means more than I can say." I nodded, unable to find words. Because the truth was, in that quiet classroom, with the storm outside pressing us closer together, I didn't feel like a helper, or an assistant, or even a student. I felt like a man sitting across from a woman who, for the first time in a long while, allowed herself to be vulnerable. And that realization changed everything. By the time the rain eased, the classroom felt like its own little world. The clock ticked steadily, marking the late hour, but neither of us moved to leave. Piles of graded papers sat neatly stacked, our work finished, and yet the silence between us held more weight than any task we could pretend to busy ourselves with. She leaned back in her chair, stretching slightly, her blouse shifting as she rolled her shoulders with a sigh. "You know," she said, her voice soft with fatigue but tinged with amusement, "when I was your age, I thought I'd have life all figured out. A career, a family, stability. Turns out life doesn't care much for our timelines." I smiled faintly, resting my arms on the desk. "And now?" She tilted her head, considering, her eyes distant for a moment before finding mine again. "Now I'm rediscovering who I am without the titles attached. No longer a wife. Not just a teacher. Just me." Her laugh came gently, though a little hollow. "It's harder than I thought." Something in her honesty tightened my chest. I wanted to reach across the desk, to reassure her in some way, but instead I settled for words. "That's brave. Most people just hide behind the titles, even if they don't fit anymore." Her gaze lingered on me, as though she hadn't expected that answer. Then, slowly, her lips curved into a smile, a real one this time, soft but alive. "You're too sincere for your own good," she teased lightly, shaking her head. I grinned. "And you sound like you're not used to people being sincere with you." The air shifted between us at that, laughter trailing off into something quieter. Her eyes held mine a little too long, steady and unguarded. The kind of look that makes your pulse pick up without warning. She leaned forward, pointing out a smudge of ink on my hand. "You'll leave here looking like a walking notebook," she murmured, her tone playfully scolding. Before I could respond, she reached across and brushed her thumb over the mark, her skin warm against mine. The touch was small, ordinary by anyone else's measure, but it carried a charge that left me still. My breath caught, just faintly, and I wondered if she felt the same shift, the same quiet spark threading between us. Her thumb lingered an instant too long before she pulled back, as though remembering herself. "There," she said lightly, her tone almost casual. But the faint flush rising to her cheeks betrayed her. I chuckled softly, forcing the air back into my lungs. "Thanks. I suppose I needed saving." She met my eyes again, a hint of playfulness returning to her voice. "Don't get used to it." But even as she said it, her gaze softened. And in that empty classroom, with the rain finally faded and only the low hum of the lights above us, I realized something unspoken had shifted. We weren't just teacher and assistant anymore. We were two people caught in a moment neither of us dared name, yet neither of us wanted to let go of. The clock hands had crawled past 8 when she finally pushed her chair back with a sigh. "We've done enough for tonight," she said, gathering the last of the papers into a folder. Her voice carried that practiced authority I'd always admired, but there was a softness to it now, a note that made me want to linger instead of leave. I stood to help her, reaching for the pile on the edge of the desk. She moved at the same time, and in that unthinking overlap of motion, the folder slipped, spilling loose sheets across the floor. We both bent down quickly, almost colliding. My hand caught the edge of a paper just as hers did, and our fingers pressed together, firm, not accidental this time. The contact froze us both. The world seemed to narrow to that one point of touch. Her skin was warm, smooth, her nails lightly grazing the back of my knuckles. She didn't pull away immediately, and I couldn't either. Instead, the silence thickened, heavy with something unsaid. When our eyes met, it wasn't like before, no teasing, no guarded smiles. It was raw. Her pupils widened slightly, the faintest flicker of uncertainty breaking through the composure she always carried. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. The classroom felt smaller than ever, the scattered papers a flimsy excuse for why we were still kneeling side by side on the floor. Finally, she cleared her throat, breaking the spell. "Clumsy," she whispered, almost as if speaking too loud would shatter something fragile between us. Her hand slipped away, but the warmth lingered against my skin. We gathered the rest of the papers in silence, though silence was the wrong word. Every shift of movement, every brush of an elbow or shoulder felt magnified, as though the air itself had grown charged. When she rose to her feet, she swayed slightly, balancing the folder against her hip. Without thinking, I reached out, steadying her by the wrist. The moment stretched. My hand wrapped gently around her, fingers resting against the delicate bones just beneath her skin. I meant only to help her balance, but when she didn't move away, I held on a fraction longer than I should have. Her lips parted, as though she might say something, but instead she let out a small, unsteady breath. The sound tightened something in my chest. "Thank you," she said softly, finally pulling her hand free. Her tone carried more weight than the words deserved, like she wasn't just thanking me for steadying her body, but for something deeper she couldn't name. A rumble of thunder rolled outside, distant yet heavy, as if the storm hadn't finished with us after all. We both stood there, a step too close, neither moving toward the door. The classroom felt less like a place of lessons and more like a suspended moment in time, one that neither of us had expected, and yet neither seemed willing to end. By the time we finished tidying the last papers, the school was nearly silent. The hallways beyond the classroom stretched into darkness, lit only by the occasional dim security light. Inside, our own room was softer now too, shadows spilling across the floor as the old fluorescent bulbs flickered toward their end. She leaned against the edge of the desk, arms folded loosely, as though she was trying to ground herself. Her shoulders weren't squared like they usually were during the day. Instead, they sloped with weariness, as if she was letting herself stop performing for just a moment. "It's strange," she murmured, her gaze fixed on the rain-streaked window. "You can live with someone for years, share every part of your life, and then one day, it's just gone. You go home, and it's quiet. Too quiet." Her voice dipped lower at the last words, almost breaking, though she quickly masked it with a shaky laugh. "Sorry. That's not really detention talk, is it?" I shook my head gently. "I don't mind. Sometimes the things you don't say during the day are the ones that matter most at night." That made her look at me. Really look. Her eyes glistened faintly in the dim light, not with tears but with something heavier, the weight of years carried alone. She hugged her own arms then, like she was holding herself together. I took a step closer before I could second-guess myself. Slowly, carefully, I reached out and touched her hand where it rested against her side. My fingers covered hers lightly, just enough to say, "You don't have to hold it all by yourself." She didn't pull away. Instead, she let out a breath I don't think she realized she'd been holding. The tension in her shoulders eased, though her lips trembled faintly. "You're kind," she whispered, her voice breaking the hush around us. "Too kind." I haven't felt, noticed, in a long time. The word struck me deeper than I expected. Because to me, she wasn't just noticeable. She was luminous, even in her quiet sadness, maybe because of it. You deserve to be, I said simply. Her fingers shifted beneath mine, not breaking contact but curling slightly, as if testing the idea of letting someone in again. The storm outside pressed against the windows, the steady patter of rain mixing with the soft creaks of the old building. It felt as though the world had narrowed to just the two of us. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, finally, she admitted in a voice almost too quiet to hear, "I'm scared of being alone, but I'm just as scared of being seen." I squeezed her hand, careful and steady. Maybe being seen doesn't have to be so frightening. Her lips curved, small and tremulous, but real. She didn't let go of my hand. And in that silence, heavy with shadows and rain and something fragile growing between us, I knew she had just given me a piece of herself no one else had been allowed to touch. That we lingered longer than we should have, the classroom lit only by the faint glow of a single desk lamp. Shadows stretched across the walls, and the storm outside had dwindled into a steady drizzle, soft and persistent. Mrs. Lane stacked the last of the books into a neat pile, her movements slower now, almost reluctant. I rose to help, and in the shuffle our hands brushed again, sending that familiar current up my arm. This time, neither of us pretended it was nothing. She looked at me, really looked, her eyes searching, almost cautious. "You're going to make me forget where the lines are," she murmured, half to herself. I swallowed, my pulse quickening. Maybe some lines are meant to blur. Her lips parted, as though she wanted to scold me, but no words came. Instead, she leaned closer to take the last book from my hand. Her shoulder brushed mine, warm and steady, and I could hear the faint hitch in her breath. The air thickened. Every detail became sharper, the scent of her perfume, the rhythm of rain against the glass, the soft scratch of paper as she set the book down. And then she leaned in, so close that her cheek nearly grazed mine. Her voice came as a whisper, hushed and deliberate, her breath feathering against my ear. "Detention never felt this good." The words slid through me like a spark, playful yet heavy with something unspoken. My chest tightened, caught between laughter and a rush of heat that left me motionless. I turned my head slightly, close enough that I could see the faintest smile tugging at the corner of her lips, the flicker of vulnerability behind her composure. For a moment, the world held still, balanced on the edge of something neither of us had dared name until now. I let out a soft laugh, the sound low, intimate. "Then maybe we're doing it right." She pulled back just enough to meet my eyes, her expression caught between humor and hesitation. But the hesitation didn't erase the warmth, if anything, it deepened it. We stood there, neither stepping away, hands brushing again as we gathered the last stack of papers. This time, our fingers lingered, resting together atop the pile as though neither wanted to be the first to let go. The silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. It was charged, humming with the weight of what had been whispered, what had been admitted without ever needing more words. Finally, she drew a slow breath and gave a small shake of her head, a smile ghosting across her lips. "Your trouble," she said quietly, though the affection in her tone softened the warning. "Maybe," I answered, my voice steady now. "But the good kind." Her laugh was soft, almost disbelieving, but her eyes didn't leave mine. And in that look, I saw it, the shift. The acknowledgement that what was happening between us was no longer just accidental glances and brushed hands. It was real. And though the storm outside had quieted, inside that classroom, something new had just begun to stir, something far more powerful than either of us had expected. When the evening began, the building felt hollow as we finally stepped into the hallway, our footsteps echoing against the linoleum floors. The storm had calmed to a drizzle, though the faint rumble of thunder lingered far off, like the night hadn't fully decided to let us go. Mrs. Lane walked beside me, her folder tucked against her chest, her pace unhurried. There was no longer the brisk authority of a teacher leaving work behind. Instead, she moved with a kind of measured quiet, as though she, too, was reluctant for this night to end. At the doors, I pushed them open, and the cool night air wrapped around us. The scent of rain clung to the ground, fresh and sharp, mixing with the dampness of old brick and wet grass. She paused just beneath the overhang, eyeing the drizzle that still fell steadily across the parking lot. "Of course," she muttered softly, half smiling. "No umbrella." I lifted mine, small and worn, the kind that barely fit one person comfortably. "I've got one," I said, holding it up with a grin. Her eyes flicked to it, then back to me. A faint laugh escaped her lips, not the guarded one she wore in the classroom, but something warmer, freer. "That hardly looks big enough for two." I stepped closer, opening it with a soft click. "Guess we'll have to walk close, then." For a heartbeat, she hesitated, and I wondered if she might refuse, retreat behind the careful walls she had begun to lower tonight. But then she stepped forward, tucking herself beneath the umbrella beside me. The fabric dipped slightly with the weight of the raindrops above, bringing us even closer. Her shoulder brushed mine, steady and warm, and I felt her shift, just enough so the side of her body rested against me. Not leaning, not by accident, but a quiet acceptance of the closeness. We walked in silence at first, the rain tapping its rhythm above us. Each step felt deliberate, carrying us forward but also holding us suspended in something fragile and new. At the edge of the lot, near where our paths would part, she slowed. Her hand slipped from the folder at her chest, brushing lightly against mine. Then, almost without thought, her fingers laced with mine, not tightly, but enough to let me know it was real. She turned her face up toward me, her expression soft, her eyes searching mine with a vulnerability she had hidden all evening. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice nearly lost beneath the rain. I squeezed her hand gently, the warmth of it steady against my palm. "For what?" "For seeing me," she said simply. The words settled deep in my chest, heavier than any promise, truer than any confession. At the gate, she let go, her hand slipping away slowly, almost reluctantly. She gave me one last look, a quiet smile, her eyes carrying both the hesitation of the past and the hope of something still unwritten. And then she turned, walking into the night. Not as a teacher, not as someone broken by loss, but as a woman beginning again. I stood there beneath the umbrella, rain pattering softly above, knowing that tonight hadn't been an ending at all. It was the beginning of something rare, something fragile, and something worth waiting for.